Well, hello, nobody. Today I gotta get some other stuff off my chest. Some stuff that I want to talk about. I want to talk about personality, and that's a whole lot of wind, so I hope you can hear me. Yeah. I want to talk about personality, and specifically clashes in your personality. This is really something that I've been, I guess, exploring or going through or even kind of finding out. And I kind of call it the pastor teacher clash, but I actually kind of got the first type of revelation when I did a life languages course type of thing, or like a test that can see what are your most prominent life languages. When I got the results back, they really gave me I don't know, kind of like an eye opener, I guess, in some sense. Because my top two languages, you have like these three different categories of languages. I think there's 7 in total, but 3 categories: thinkers, doers, and feelers. And what they basically say is that everybody does all 3 in some capacity, hopefully. But most people, they live and they also communicate with one of these 3 as the first language. So yeah, you have the thinkers, like the deep contemplators, or more like the planners and stuff. You have the doers, people who really are focused on action, who really also feel fulfilled when they are, you could say, doing something or moving something. And feelers are the people who are more like want to connect to people. And for me, my top 2 languages were kind of clashing. And it kind of just, I understood like something that's been happening, I guess, for a long time. My number 1 language was what they call the influencer. Well, the influencer, I believe, was actually an emotion-built language. It's like, I would say, stereotype description of it would be like somebody who's open, who's expressive, who's high energy, who can kind of fill the room and connect easily to a lot of people, stuff like that. And then my second language was the contemplator, which was like exactly the opposite of that. Introverted, in his mind, thinks more about stuff and objects than about people. And when I saw that, I could really immediately see like, this is what's going to be bothering me, or this is what is in some sense clashing in me. Like when I was younger, I think I shared it a little bit in the first episode, but when I was younger, I felt a bit more free to express myself. I guess also not in every subject, but just maybe it was easier for me to defend an idea or to have discussions, arguments. I was always a kind of fearful kid, I would say, and used, you could say, that influencer side to create a safe environment around me. Like I knew what I had, who I had to be around who, and I could connect easily to all kinds of people, but found it hard to kind of figure out, I guess, in some sense, who am I completely? Like, well, of course, I am the person who can easily adapt to people, but is there like a base mode that I'm not fully inhabiting in some sense? But either way, like I used to be, even though I was strong socially, I was actually kind of cold in the sense that I was, in my mind, it was just kind of like a big game in some sense, I guess. It's not like I didn't connect to people at all. It was more like I would find it very hard to find a like deeper connection to people. So it felt like I was living my life in third person in some sense. So it felt like I was always looking at the situation I was in instead of really being in the situation. And I found myself just not, I guess in some sense, not caring deeply about other people, in the sense that I wasn't the type of guy to be like, hey, how you really doing, to like really see how you're doing and actually want to hear that. So I don't know if this is also like a man woman kind of thing, but I don't want to use that as a cop out. I think what I just noticed was that because I was fearful, I was so focused on kind of organizing my life in a way that I felt safe, that I couldn't really be there. I couldn't really be present in those moments. That's why I kind of, by continuing to do that third person kind of thing, you're like, okay, this person, if I say this, then they're probably going to say that. And I'm going to say this, they're probably going to respond like that. I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to walk away and connect with that other person. So I guess also that contemplator side and the influencer side got together in a way where you could say the contemplator was ruling more, and the influencer side was kind of like a tool in some sense. But eventually, especially when it came to faith, I felt alone. I just felt alone a lot. And my desire was this side that was in me. I found it easy to connect, that wanted harmony, unity, bring people together. I guess I wanted to learn more how to love, you could say. So, yeah, I started to kind of push myself out of my comfort zone to like, okay, go and share some things that are on your heart. Share things that are really, that are bothering you, or I guess in some sense you maybe appeared, you try to appear without flaws, in the sense of you were like trying to, because you were trying to feel safe, you were not really out there like share your flaws with everybody. So that was, I guess, I think a big step that I took, and I just wanted to learn how to listen. So I just tried to hear people's stories and hear what they were going through, and it was really tough in the beginning because sounds bad, but it was like I just did not care. But I wanted to care. So you were sitting and you're like, I just don't give a shit. Sorry, I don't care what you're saying. I felt like this urge of me to go away, to be like, this is just costing me mental energy, and I just want to leave this. But I kind of stuck with it, and I was like, no. I believe really in speaking truth and overcoming those kind of like strong, pernicious, is that the right word? Lies in your mind. So I was always convinced that even though that is like your strong first reaction, that doesn't necessarily have to be the truth, even if it's so dominant in your mind. Because I believe the truth about us is in God. The truth is about how He made us, and if that clashes not with who we are right now, then it can be changed. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So I was like, I'm going to think differently, and I'm going to change as a person. And it worked in the sense that I felt like I grew closer to people. I felt like I connected more to people. But in that transition, I kind of felt I'm always still a contemplator, in the sense that I find ideas interesting, and that's why I was thinking about what is church, and like I have all these kind of things. What is a Christian? And I always loved kind of diving deeper into like what is truth. And I was persuaded that Jesus was the basis for truth, but then still, like, what does that mean for this world and who we are as human beings, and what we should be doing, what I should be doing? And I think that in the desire, I would say in the influencer became more my more dominant language, or at least I was pushing that language out more. Because, yeah, it is still who I am, like that, in the sense of that is easy for me. That is where my heart is. I like to connect people. I like to see people flourish. So kind of like that coaching side in me. I like to develop people. I like to see people do well. But in some sense, I'm highly competitive myself. So it used to be like I was super competitive and just look down on everybody else. So you try to outcompete people and try to find your identity that way. So it made it really hard when you've been telling yourself that everybody's stupid and everybody's not as smart as you, or not as competent as you, and then all of a sudden you want to acknowledge them and elevate them, then you're going to have to say, believe something very different about them, right? Like, so I was challenging that inner internalized belief about everybody else's inferiority. But that also meant that in some sense I needed to re-identify myself in some sense. If your identity is built upon being better than other people, or comparing yourself to other people, there's this verse in the Bible that those who compare themselves among themselves are not wise, Wesley. So I noticed that in itself kind of brought about some form of crisis. I wouldn't say a crisis, but a change. And yeah, I just didn't really know what to do with that in the beginning, I guess, in some sense. You try to speak what I believe to be true about people, that they are inherently valuable, that it's not necessarily how gifted they are, or because I think that can be a mistake. I think that sometimes we in an effort to affirm people and make them like strengthen them in their personality, in their identity, we actually use superficial things to empower them, which could just fall away, right? Like you just say, oh no, but you're really good at this, or oh, but you're so beautiful, and actually you're still kind of confirming especially from a Christian kind of theological perspective, you're still affirming the fleshly side of somebody instead of confirming more, no, you are inherently valuable because of what you are. Not just, first, what you are a human being. That means you are created by God, that you breathe His Spirit into you, you became a living soul. There's something special, almost divine. I wouldn't say like divine as in what you would hear in Eastern religions, but there's something that we're made in the image of God, made to image God. There's a divine purpose, a divine role over our lives. And that, like that spiritual side, I mean, much of the New Testament and the Bible is actually about letting go of your flesh, letting go of yourself, letting go of the things you think you do well, or you're kind of just are natural, and try to really affirm what happened to you spiritually, that you're made one with God, that you're, well, although you could say the positive attributes, the fruits of the Spirit, they are called, like peace, gentleness, kindness, like, so that be your identity. So that's maybe a little, I'm branching off a little bit, but that's the contemplator for you. That actually, I try to do that for myself with other people. No, they are inherently valuable. They are inherently worthy to be loved, even though our behaviors often don't portray that. There is something inherent in human beings why they should be loved, because they are made in the image of God, right? Like they're image bearers of God. So that's our calling, to love. And if everybody would love, then everybody would also be loved, right? Anyway, back to my journey. I, for myself, try to do that with myself as well. No, Wesley, you're not good or loved or whatever because you can do this well, or because all these people say that about you, that you're doing that well, or whatever. I think that's maybe the downfall of sometimes being like a very extroverted person, or in some sense a talented person, in the sense of like you do really well at school, you get to the highest levels, and learning has been easy. Kind of like the contemplators. I think I don't know if their average people with the contemplative language are on average more intelligent as well, but at least I know I performed well in school. I know I was up there in that sense, and that was always kind of my identity. Oh, I'm intelligent. Oh, I'm smart. Oh, and I noticed it in the sense that I could learn things quickly. I found it interesting to analyze complex ideas, and in some sense, you would get some validation by sharing your knowledge, or yeah, as I've been noticing now more and more, that kind of an oversharing part of yourself is in a way seeking this validation of that identity. But so yeah, by shifting more towards the influencer side, or what I would say the pastor side, the pastor is the shepherd, the one who you could say has the heart to unite people, to bring people together, to see people either one-on-one, and to have groups be in unity and harmony. But the contemplator side is not really thinking about people, it's thinking about ideas and concepts. And I would say that's the teacher side, especially kind of from a Christian perspective, the teacher. And he cares more about truth than about people, so to say. Like if we just kind of make it a two-dimensional character right now, of course, the teacher also has to care about people because he has to be filled with love, but the teacher cares about truths, about structure of truth, about theology, about how the world works, about ideas. And you often see in the Bible the idea of pastor-teacher, that if you have these both tools in harmony, that are extremely powerful, because you know about the truth, you care about the truth, you can explain the truth, but you also have a heart for people, so you can bring the truth in a way that they will grasp, or you can teach at a level where they are at right now, right? But if one of these two becomes more powerful, so I think I shifted more towards, you could say, the pastor heart and the influencer side, and that contemplator kind of like truth person, teacher side kind of took a more of a back seat. And what happened is that you could say maybe the pitfall of the people who wants to bring people together is that he will avoid conflict just for the sake of a sense of harmony, right? The other side is like, screw harmony. This is what's important. This is truth. And truth, just like Jesus says, truth is like a sword, right? Like he even said for himself, I've not come to bring peace. I've come to bring a sword. If we judge between good and evil for our own lives, you automatically also judge for other people in some sense, right? Like if you say, I think this is not what we should be pursuing, or I think that is really wrong, even if you only apply it to your life, just by you living out those values, people can already kind of feel judged in some sense. And I really noticed that in my heart and my desire to bring people together, I was quenching this other side of me, this side that wants to talk about ideas, that is like, I know you're hurt, I know you're hurting, and you've been through all these things, but this is wrong, you know? This is wrong, even if you can't handle that. And I guess in that desire to please people, it's such a horrible state to be in some sense. And that desire to be, I guess you become automatically more of a people pleaser if you just kind of worry about, what have people been through? Oh, the harmony, everybody gonna come together. I mean, it's true, that's, I guess, where some form of compassion starts. But if you also are afraid then of a group disintegrating, or you're afraid of rejection, like that's especially when you need to confront somebody, you're afraid of rejection, then you won't. Then you won't confront, you know, like, and then shit will just keep going. And people will not hear what they need to hear when they need to hear it. And I think in that struggle, I just lost a part of myself. And I think it's just like, it wasn't consciously at the time. Like it felt to me like I was growing. It felt to me like, because I was in some sense stepping in a new type of dimension that I wasn't really walking in before, earlier in my life. And maybe, if we talk about identity, the identity marker switched from having a lot of knowledge or doing that well to, oh, I can read people really well or help people really well. And that's also dangerous. So I really felt that after a while, something going kind of through a second burnout, unfortunately, the last couple of months or year, maybe even longer than a year right now. And I think one of these things, what I felt was like that all of a sudden I started noticing I'm angry. I didn't even notice, because I was like, in the beginning it was just like, I felt kind of trapped, and I just felt kind of weird emotions like pressure, like I find it hard to breathe, or like kind of anxiety type of symptoms, I guess, like finding it more difficult to breathe, or feeling this weight or this emotional knot in your stomach. And you were like, I was like, what is this? Like, why do I feel this? I never felt stuff like that. Not before I had a first burnout that really kind of shook up my nerve system, I think, in some sense. That made my body kind of react more viscerally to, it's like it's just turned the on switch to like fight and flight switch on when it shouldn't be turned on, right? Like, so even like basic things that were slight opposition, if it was like anticipating a conflict, it would be like, your whole body would be like on alert. You were tense in your mind, pressure on your chest, not your stomach. But after a while, I figured out, like, I was kind of praying through it, and also my wife talking to it, and I figured out, like, hey, wait a minute, I am angry. I didn't even know, like, I couldn't really deal with the emotion of anger, both me being angry as other people being angry towards me. I just didn't really know what to do with that. I think in some sense I was afraid of what would happen if I would allow anger. Kind of also afraid of what would the retribution be, or like the response be. It felt like the moment you give into anger, you go into the zone where it's like, this is becoming out of control. And I was always focused on keeping things under control. So, especially when I became a Christian, like in the beginning, I would just like, I don't give a shit about, I don't care about you, you know, like, or you couldn't in that sense really be angry because you were looking down on everybody. But the moment you started to let people in and open up more, and I guess you felt like the Christian response was always to humble yourself in some sense, which there's some truth in that. But if you're not really doing that in a conscious way out of love, then you're actually being forced to do that, and you're actually doing that out of fear and not out of love. And that's usually when, I think that's what kind of started the anger thing. Because it's actually like, you're like, this is unfair, or this is ridiculous, or you want to push back, but you're afraid to push back because you don't want to hurt the other person. So you're like, well, I'll take the hurt. I can handle that. But as turned out, over a long period of time, no, you can't handle that. Or at least I couldn't. And there's some other factors that played a role here. I think because of the burnout, I felt like I found it more difficult to kind of connect with God in the sense of like drinking with God, like really being energized and empowered. I had that for a season, and I guess through disappointments and that physical infirmity, I spent less time than I used to did before, and I found it harder to connect in prayer. And you kind of feel like if you're not being filled up, and then you're being confronted with, sometimes toxic behavior or toxic people, wounded people, then it just kind of goes into the cycle, like a person that has this destructive behavior patterns that just goes blast, 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 blame, blame, blame. And if you're not filled with the power and the Spirit of God, and you're just going on human strength, and you're just going to be like, okay, I'm going to take it, something's going to go wrong somewhere. And that fear, I think, it was a fear to step into that other side of myself. Also because there were people in the past that felt distanced by that or shut down by that because they were either intimidated by the way I communicated, because I'm kind of calm now for my being, but I'm intense. Usually when I talk, I'm intense. Not because I'm angry or anything, but just because I'm intense. I just communicate in that way. That's why people often think, oh, you must really care about that subject. I'm like, no, not really. This is just like my base level of communication. And that was, I think, I really felt like this other side of me, because in some sense, you don't want to be like a rage monster, be like, this is true, I don't give a crap about you, like that. But there is a balance. There is especially if you look at the life of Jesus, he was definitely not afraid to confront. He was definitely not afraid to insult even people. Openly, publicly even, calling people to account, stuff like that. And I think this is another subject I don't want to talk about, like the emasculation of men and the feminization of men. And this is happening in Christianity, I think, a lot as well. It kind of depends on which branch of Christianity you're in, whether it's how bad it is, but especially for my experience in the more open Pentecostal charismatic kind of circles, there tends to be a huge focus on the feminine side of God, of like the grace, the mercy, the heart, the compassion. Come here, God wants to give you a hug. And I think with the problem in the Christian world, and I guess in the world in general, but especially also there, is the idea of the nice guy, right? Like in some sense, in trying to be in that influencer mode, in that pastor mode of wanting to please people, is wanting to be seen as a nice guy, wanting to be a nice guy, or even seeing that as like a moral good to be a nice guy. And sure, kindness and gentleness are fruits of the Spirit, so there's definitely something to say for that. But what it's beginning to be now is just be a complete pushover. Like, it's to basically be a man with all feminine qualities and no masculine qualities. There's no emphasis often on God's holiness, God's judgments, God's you can say the prophet the prophet focus, the teacher focus, in the sense of like, this is what's true and I'll fight for it, right? Like I'll stand for that. Kind of what we talked about last time about speaking truth. So, but then I got this, so I saw kind of like, oh, whoa, this anger has been building up apparently. Apparently there's this whole chunk of anger that I got to get rid of because I felt slighted in all these little situations, all these little things and bigger things, I guess. But maybe worse than the feeling slighted, I think it's the thing that was causing anger more was that you felt like you had something to say or something you should be saying or something, but out of Sometimes it was like really a concrete fear, but sometimes it was just like, because you've built up that pattern of fear in some sense, I would just not even feel the anger in a moment, or the like, I want to say this in a moment. It would just take like a day, and then you're like, wait a minute. And that was just really messed up. It was like your head and your emotions in some sense were so completely separated that I could just kind of zone myself out and go in complete abstract mode, and then be in those situations and not really feel what I would feel in those situations. Like some people are like all in their emotions, right? Like they're in a situation and somebody pokes them and they're and they respond like that. I was like maybe the unhealthy opposite of that, where I could just hear stuff and be like, okay, you know, like, and in my mind, I thought I was like, okay. Thought I was okay about it. Like, yeah, like you could see, okay, I can see that person is angry. It's probably has to do with this. And you kind of like, oh, is it analytical side? But in some sense, somewhere that other side was taking hits, and it was kind of like saying, hey, bro, you can zone out in your abstract place, but you're not giving me any room for expression, like nothing at all. And I felt this desire, so I felt the shift coming, like slowly the understanding came of my subconscious behaviors, like by praying and like talking to God, talking with my wife, and just a lot of stuff coming out, like crying and frustrations and things that were in there, also like frustrations towards God. But then kind of the real conundrum, like this subject, the clashing in your personality, what it felt like, and what it's in some sense still feels like, it feels like I can be both. And I know that's a lie, because I know, well, God has given both of these, you could say, hearts, this passion about truth and this passion about people. And I believe he means for them to strengthen each other and not to break each other down. Because now it feels like I can't be the pastor type, I can't be the unifying type if I also want to speak truth, and I can't really speak truth if I want to be the unifying type, right? Like, so that's kind of the lie, I guess, or the clash that I'm dealing with right now, where it's like, but how? And we always want the tree of knowledge of good and evil. God, tell me what to do, when to do it, and I got this. So that's what I find fascinating about the life of Jesus, that you can see that there is no playbook. Like, he's in every situation discerning, who do I have in front of me? Is this person genuine in their requests or in what they say? And like he knew the hearts of men. And it's like this very interesting thing that always kind of bugged me in some sense, as somebody with that heart, kind of like that pastor heart, wanting to bring people together and wanting to learn. Also be like, I want to learn how to love more, and I want to learn how to be loved more. And I was always this distant person. I want to be close now. And there's this verse that says, but Jesus did not entrust himself to any man, for he knew what was in man. Which just like, kind of just baffled me. So the person that was love on the earth and manifested the heart of God and the love of God in the perfect way, if you believe Christian doctrine, which I believe, that is Jesus, the manifestation of God. That person did not entrust himself to anyone. ¿Qué pasa? You know, like, that was kind of like a clash. So that means that loving somebody does not necessarily mean entrusting your heart to them. Of course, we need to define then, what does that mean? What is the entrusting the heart then? And for now, how I can kind of try to make sense of it is that he did not come to get anything from anybody. He was not like, oh, my heart has this, I had to entrust his heart. It's also like, oh, my heart has this issue in some sense. I am upset or lonely or afraid or whatever. Help me. That he would go, God, help me. Like, I think that's how I kind of, only kind of way I can make sense of it right now. So that doesn't necessarily solve my clash. It just adds more questions. Because I think there's also this, I think, a sense of self-condemnation I've been maybe feeding or feeling. And I've never really had strong emotional responses to people, which made me feel when I was younger, or to be honest, sometimes, not really, but like occasionally, like you think like, am I some kind of psychopath or something? Like, nobody would say that about me in the sense like if I really love bringing people together, but it's like I love being around people, lifting up people, but I just don't have a strong emotional feeling with that, which can be hard to understand for some people, and sometimes hard for myself. You think like, is something wrong with me, or is this just like, is that just who I am? Like I can, for example, I very rarely miss someone. Like, it could be people I love, but I've never really felt that emotion in the sense of like, oh, I want this person to just, like more in a mental way. Like, oh, it would be fun if this person would be here and we could do this together, especially because I moved to Ecuador now. But like, you miss your family in the sense of, I want them to be here. But even with those things, with the people you love the most, you don't feel a very strong kind of sensation. And I get the impression that a bunch of people, or maybe a lot of people, do have that. But maybe I'm wrong, like, so I guess that's also in understanding yourself, in understanding, again, those who compare themselves among themselves are not wise. I am comparing myself in some sense to other people that do experience that. And I can kind of get a mixed feeling about that. Sometimes I also feel like, that don't feel healthy. Like, as maybe from a Christian perspective, also like, love is not seeking itself, right? Like, love is giving. Love is seeking the other, building up the other. It's not looking like what you can give me. It's looking at what I can give you. So in some sense, it feels like a perfect being, a being that's perfect in love, is never thinking about itself. So would never, in some sense, you think, in some sense, feel hurt or feel neglected or rejected because it's not thinking about its own position, right? Like, and I guess that's also the only way you can make sense of how a being like God can exist and not just completely exterminate the galaxy, because if he truly is a being that can love, that is a person in some sense, that in the sense that he has personhood, he has a will, he loves, he thinks, he has ideas, he desires in some sense, and then we would reject him, like most of humanity has rejected God in some sense, or failed to live up to what God desires for his people. God would be an absolute mess if he would, like all the millions and billions of people across time that are rejected him and messing up their lives. Like, he would be like a basket case. He would be like, just. So in some sense, I felt like, okay, maybe I should not feel all these things. But then at the other side, you do see God in some sense responding and emotionally caring about what's going on here. Like, there's this idea of God does not want anybody to perish, or it's his desire that everybody would be saved, or he takes no pleasure in the death of the wicked. There's this sense that there's things that do not give him pleasure and things that do give him pleasure. There's stuff that he loves and stuff that he hates. He hates wickedness, he hates evil, he hates in that sense the destruction of what he created. So yeah, that's just, for me, that's just a lot of words to say. That I was just conflicted about the way my emotions work. Although now more and more, another side that's coming up is maybe it's because I've in some sense detached my emotions from my mind. That because living in the third person in some sense for a long time, I'm like of just observing the situations I was in instead of being there. And same with the anger, of not feeling the anger in the moment. And I'm working on that right now, that you would say that the anger, the response is coming closer to the actual situation where it would be justified. And I don't mean like anger and start punching people in, but like, hey, I don't agree with that. Like a healthy, righteous anger that is able to put in boundaries. And that is also, again, that masculine energy, I think, in some sense. Yeah, I'm just, in some sense, maybe it has to do with that the reason that I don't feel certain emotions as strongly, or a lot of them, is because, yeah, I've made that separation. I've kind of disconnected myself in some sense the abstract side creates a shield around experiencing the world in some sense. So it always goes through the analytical lens first and then comes closer. And as it has passed the analytical lens, it becomes an abstract idea. So that person's not angry with me. Anger as a concept starts to be kind of, what do you call it? Highlighted. And yeah, I'm actually kind of like some sense figuring that out as I speak. What is that? How can you deal with that? I don't know. So I try to be more sensitive now to when I do think I feel something like an anger or a disappointment or any type of emotion. And yeah, kind of like what we talked about last time, me, talked about speaking truth, daring to speak up. Like, do you dare to encounter that emotion and be in it, dwell in it, without immediately overreacting? I guess that's not really a concern of mine. My concern is just getting past the other, like getting back towards the middle before I worry about that. But I think there's a fear of the overreacting. And I guess that's because I've been a fearful child. I read this book about Fathered by God, which talked about like the various phases that a young boy goes through that his father should steward him in, that they don't just automatically happen. And he was talking about boyhood, where you're just a boy, you're just kind of like, like having fun and just exploring the world and being affirmed by your father, just having that safe base. Then you move on to kind of like the cowboy phase that a lot of boys go through. They just do all kinds of stuff. They are trying to learn and see what their strength is and some stuff, right? Like they try to climb trees and they sometimes break the rules a little bit, but they, in a sense, try to find that risk and adventure. And then he had multiple phases like that. You become the warrior that becomes more serious and disciplined with a purpose. Then you become the king, in the sense like you take responsibility over something. You become a steward of something. You rule something well, whether that's your family or a project or work or something like that. And then you become the sage, where you are no longer the main responsible person for some big thing like the king phase, but you are passing on that knowledge. And I immediately, when I read that, I knew I haven't had the cowboy phase. As a child, being fearful, I never really had that phase. Like, I was afraid of all these things. So I used your social smarts to create safe situations around you. But what was a consequence of that is that I feared strength. I feared, like I said, the idea of anger. Strength is maybe a better word. I feared strength in the sense of I rarely tested my strength in that way, like in a very concrete way, and like hustling, tussling, that I stayed away from every type of kind of physical confrontation. And because of that, because you were afraid of pain also, you're afraid of somebody stronger than you, whatever, somebody's stronger than me. But there was also this fear of, but what can I do in my strength? Like, can I really hurt somebody? Right? And having never, in a healthy way, been guided through that phase of taking appropriate risk, learning from that, of maybe seeing some of your strength and receiving some pushback, you can find out, okay, this is healthy, this is not, this is who I am, makes it sometimes make you feel safe, to be able to set those boundaries. And I guess in some sense my parents, my father in particular, have really stewarded me through that phase. And I think that is kind of like maybe what's underneath all this stuff, in that fearing. So I fear confrontation because I am both fearful of my capacity to hurt other people as their capacity to hurt me, and that idea of the harmony breaking, right? So now I'm learning, I guess I am going through the cowboy phase in some sense right now. I mean, moved to the other side of the world. I felt like that was a very, very important step in overcoming that fear and in embracing adventure. So yeah, got cut off by the stupid alarm again. To embrace the adventure, to embrace the not knowing, to embrace that side, and that's another side of your strength, but also now in little confrontations. It could be simple things. It could be a little confrontation with your wife, a little confrontation on the basketball court, a little confrontation about people overstepping your boundaries, people wanting something from you, and you're like, no, I'm sorry, people wanting something of your time or your attention. And I guess that's also being like an expressive person, and people always, I guess I could see people like the way I make them feel. Which is why a lot of people kind of came to you and like, I want some of that. And I couldn't say no because I felt like almost like I couldn't. And even now in this phase, I'm trying to explore more of my creative kind of side. I always was creative, but to give that more disciplined time, which is again a clash between the pastor and some other side of me, the creative and the people side, because it always felt like somebody in need calling you up and saying like, help me out, was always more important than creating something that might also be a godly focused thing that would help people in their journey with God, or learn about themselves, or be built up, whether that's a book or a game or a song or anything like that. But somehow again there's this voice. It's like, no. It's always the direct, one-on-one type of thing. And I guess now I'm purposely pushing against that to find a new balance, right? Like, and it could also be seasonal that you're shifting like that. So I'm trying, still in the middle of this in some sense, I'm trying to let go of the hope for like these are the 5 steps you need to follow, Wesley. The tree of knowledge of good and evil. I'm trying to trust more, and I guess let go of things more. Of having that faith of, no, these two sides will work together well. And maybe it's good to go feed that other side a little bit right now, because you've been feeding all the bring people together side for the past 7-8 years. Now it's good to give room to that other side and see if you can find balance. And keep listening to the voice of God. Keep focusing. I guess that's, of course, the source. Go back to Him. He is the complete personality. I think in some sense I tried to control the two sides of my personality when should one side pop up. And yeah, I think I said what I kind of wanted to say. I think it's such an important thing. But even this, in this process, is over contemplating sometimes. It's overthinking this whole thing. It's just a side of me that I find very hard to shut down, and in some sense very hard to balance, because the overanalyzation of yourself, what the Bible says, we're sinful people in the sense that we've fallen. Now we are being made whole, restored, transformed into a new image, a new mankind. And if you're going to look at that old mankind, you're always going to find something messed up, right? Like, but if you keep your eyes where you're going, on the perfect example, then sure, you will sometimes notice that I'm not like the perfect example. But you have to look at the perfect example to even go at the right direction, right? Like, you can never learn a proper tennis swing if you never see somebody do it really well, or somebody teach you how I should do it. There's 1,000 ways you can do it wrong. There's only one way you do it right. Same with like basketball. I love basketball. Like, you focus on how I should shoot a shot, not how you shouldn't shoot a shot, right? Like, so I guess that's also part of it. Yeah, lots to talk about, but it was good to talk about this. I think a lot of people might have this in different ways. Like, every personality is different, but there might be different sides of you that God has placed in you that seem to clash, right? Like, there seem to be two sides of you that can find their right way out. And yeah, I guess I just want to encourage you to also go rant a little bit to kind of see. I believe there is a harmony, but that harmony is not always mechanical, but more fluid in some sense. And especially a personality type like myself that likes to have control by knowing it can be difficult. And it can be, I guess there's this fear that if I go back more to the contemplator side, I'll become this self-centered, ruthless guy that doesn't give a shit about anybody anymore. And that's a lie. I have to believe that what was built is built. And what was not right about what was being built there, that's okay. God can take that away, the storm shakes it, takes that away, and the base that is good will remain. And we'll just keep building. Just keep building. Thank you, audience of Zero, for listening to my rants. Next time, I don't know what I'm going to talk about next time. There's so many subjects. Maybe fatherhood and men, or that idea of masculinity, femininity, maybe the transgender thing. I don't know. Plenty. We'll see. Au revoir.